The mirror-walled studio smelled of rubber mats and the faint citrus of industrial cleaner. I adjusted the resistance bands hanging from their hooks for the third time that morning. A nervous habit I'd developed over 2 years of working at Elite Fitness. My reflection stared back at me, blonde hair pulled into a practical ponytail, navy athletic wear that had seen better days but still looked professional enough. The 5:30 a.m. slot was always quiet, just the hum of the overhead lights and the distant clank of weights from the main floor. My hands moved automatically through the morning routine, checking equipment, wiping down surfaces that were already clean, arranging clipboards in perfect alignment. This was my domain. Small, but mine. As a personal trainer, I'd built a modest client base over the past 18 months, mostly early morning regulars who appreciated my no-nonsense approach and careful attention to form over flashy results. I pulled out my phone to check the day's schedule. 7 clients, back-to-back from 6 until 2. The usual faces, the usual goals. Mrs. Battaglia working on her post-surgery mobility. Young Paolo trying to bulk up for his upcoming wedding. The corporate executive who always arrived 10 minutes late and left 5 minutes early. And then, at the bottom of the list, a notation in Alessia's handwriting. New client, 6 a.m., Renato Mancini. Alessia says VIP treatment. VIP. The designation made my stomach tighten slightly. In my experience, VIP clients fell into 2 categories: genuinely wealthy people who were pleasant to work with, or entitled nightmares who thought their money bought them the right to disregard every professional boundary. I'd learned to brace myself for either possibility. The studio door opened precisely at 5:55 a.m., 5 minutes before his scheduled time. I turned from the weight rack, prepared smile already in place, and felt my professional greeting die in my throat. He was tall, easily 6'2", with dark hair that looked like it had been professionally styled even at this ungodly hour. The kind of face that belonged in cologne advertisements. All sharp angles and defined features that suggested both Italian heritage and expensive skincare. But it was his eyes that caught me, a pale gray that seemed to catalog everything in the room, including me, in a single sweep. His athletic wear was understated, but unmistakably expensive. No logos, just perfect tailoring that suggested custom work. Everything about him radiated controlled power, from his unhurried movements to the way he stood just inside the doorway, waiting to be acknowledged rather than demanding attention. "Mr. Mancini," I managed, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm Giulia Ferretti. I'll be your trainer this morning." He nodded once, a precise movement that conveyed acknowledgement without excess. "Renato, please." His voice was deep, textured with an accent that suggested he'd grown up speaking Italian at home, but had perfected his English in expensive schools. The formality of his response somehow made the space between us feel smaller. I gestured toward the assessment area, a corner of the studio with a desk and 2 chairs. "Let's start with some basic information. Health history, current fitness level, and your goals." As a trainer, I'd learned to read bodies the way mechanics read engines, looking for the tells that indicated how someone moved through the world. Renato walked with perfect posture, weight distributed evenly, no favoring of one side. Either he'd never been injured, or he'd been taught to hide weakness so thoroughly it had become second nature. He sat in the chair I indicated, and I took my place behind the desk, pulling out the standard intake form. My hands were steady as I clicked my pen, falling into the familiar rhythm of professional assessment. "Any current injuries or medical conditions I should know about?" I began, checking boxes as he answered. "No. Previous experience with strength training or athletics? Some boxing, years ago." His answers were economical, offering exactly what was asked and nothing more. I continued through the questionnaire, noting his responses in the margins. No medications, no dietary restrictions. Sleep schedule regular. The picture that emerged was of someone who took care of himself, with the same precision he seemed to apply to everything else. "All right," I said, setting down my pen. Last question. What's your goal? It was the question I asked every new client, the foundation upon which I'd build their program. Some wanted weight loss. Others sought muscle gain. Many just wanted to feel better, to move through their days with less pain and more energy. The answer told me not just what they wanted, but how seriously they took the process. Renato leaned back slightly in his chair, and for the first time since entering the studio, something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but a softening around his eyes that suggested genuine amusement. A date with you. The words landed in the quiet studio like a stone dropped into still water. I felt heat flood my face, that telltale burn of embarrassment that had plagued me since childhood. My mind went completely blank for 3 full seconds before my professional training kicked in. I stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor with an ugly sound. I'm sorry, Mr. Mancini, but I don't think this is going to work out. Let me have Alessia reassign you to one of our male trainers. I apologize. He stood as well, his movements unhurried despite my obvious agitation. That was inappropriate. I'd like to continue with you as my trainer if you're willing. Professionally. I should have said no. Every instinct screamed at me to pass him off to Marco or Giuseppe, to remove myself from what was clearly going to be a complicated situation. But there was something in his tone, a sincerity that seemed at odds with the audacity of his opening statement. Professionally, I repeated, making it both a condition and a warning. Professionally, he confirmed. I sat back down slowly, pulling the intake form toward me with fingers that trembled slightly. Then, let's try this again. What are your fitness goals, Mr. Mancini? General conditioning, strength maintenance, flexibility work. His answer was perfectly appropriate now, completely professional. And please, call me Renato. The rest of the assessment passed without incident. I put him through a series of movement tests, watching how his body responded to different planes of motion. He moved well, better than most clients, with a kind of controlled grace that spoke to years of physical training. When I had him hold a plank, I noted that his form remained perfect even as the seconds ticked past 60. You can drop, I said, making a notation on my clipboard. He lowered himself to the mat with the same control he'd shown throughout the assessment, then rose fluidly to his feet, not even breathing hard. You've trained recently, I observed, unable to keep the professional curiosity from my voice. This isn't beginner work. I've maintained a routine, but I'd like proper guidance, someone who knows what they're doing. His eyes met mine, and there was nothing flirtatious in the look, just straightforward assessment. Alessia says you're the best here. The compliment, delivered so matter-of-factly, somehow felt more genuine than if he'd tried to charm me. I found myself nodding despite my earlier discomfort. All right, I'll design a program for you. We'll start with 3 sessions a week, see how your body responds, adjust as needed. I was already mentally sketching out routines, thinking about which exercises would challenge him without risking injury. Can you commit to Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 6? Yes. The simplicity of his agreement, the lack of negotiation or excuses, marked him as different from most clients who inevitably had scheduling conflicts or wanted to start with just 1 session a week. Then I'll see you Wednesday. I extended my hand, keeping everything professional. Thank you for your patience with the reassessment. His handshake was brief, firm without being aggressive. Thank you for giving me a second chance. After he left, I stood in the empty studio for a long moment, staring at the intake form with his information. Renato Mancini. Age 33. Emergency contact left blank. The address he'd listed was in the old waterfront district, the part of the city where historic buildings had been converted into luxury lofts that I could never afford, even if I saved for a decade. Alessia appeared in the doorway, her dark eyes bright with curiosity. So, how'd it go with the VIP? He asked me out, I said flatly. Her eyebrows shot up. In the first 5 minutes? In the first 5 minutes. And I almost kicked him out. But he apologized and we finished the assessment. I gathered up my papers, not meeting her gaze. He's scheduled for Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 6. Alessia leaned against the doorframe, a knowing smile playing at her lips. You know he specifically requested you, right? Came in last week, watched you training Mrs. Battaglia, asked Chiara at the desk who you were, then signed up for a premium package on the spot. Something fluttered uncomfortably in my chest. That's kind of creepy. Or kind of romantic, Alessia suggested. Rich, handsome, clearly interested. You could do worse. I'm not interested in dating clients, I said firmly, a rule I'd established early in my career. It's unprofessional and complicated. Everything worth having is complicated, Julia. Before I could respond, my next client appeared in the hallway, and I gratefully turned my attention to work that made sense, to goals that could be quantified and achieved through simple effort and consistency. But as I guided Mrs. Battaglia through her mobility routine, I found my mind drifting back to gray eyes and an opening line that had been simultaneously the most inappropriate and most honest thing anyone had said to me in months. Wednesday arrived with the same pre-dawn darkness I'd grown accustomed to over 2 years of early morning shifts. I'd spent the past 48 hours trying not to think about Renato Mancini, which meant I'd thought about little else. I'd designed his program 3 times, each iteration more professionally distant than the last, determined to prove that I could handle this situation with complete professionalism. At 5:55 a.m., he walked through the studio door with the same precise punctuality he'd shown at our first meeting. This time I was ready, clipboard in hand, program printed out, every detail of the next hour planned to eliminate any possibility of personal interaction beyond what was absolutely necessary. Good morning, Renato. I kept my voice crisp, professional. We'll start with a dynamic warm-up, then move into compound movements. I want to establish your baseline strength before we progress to more complex programming. Good morning, Julia. His response was equally professional, but there was something in the way he said my name that made it feel less formal than it should have. I'm ready. The session proceeded exactly as I'd planned. I demonstrated each exercise, watched his form, made corrections when necessary. He followed instructions with the same focused precision he'd shown during the assessment, never questioning my choices, never trying to show off or push beyond what I'd prescribed. What I hadn't anticipated was how exhausting it would be to maintain professional distance with someone who seemed to occupy space differently than other clients. I found myself hyper-aware of proximity, of the moments when I needed to adjust his form, of the sound of his breathing as he moved through each set. By the end of the hour, I was more mentally drained than physically tired, which made no sense at all. Excellent work, I said, checking off the final exercise on my clipboard. Friday will increase the intensity slightly. Your recovery time suggests we can push a bit harder. He nodded, accepting the towel I offered. Thank you. That was it. No flirtation. No reference to his opening line from Monday. Just professional courtesy and departure. Friday followed the same pattern, then the next Monday, and Wednesday, and Friday again. 3 weeks passed, and Renato Mancini became simply another client in my schedule, distinguished only by his unusual consistency and the quiet intensity he brought to every session. Except he wasn't quite like other clients, in ways I couldn't quite articulate. It started small. On a Thursday morning, I mentioned to Mrs. Battaglia that the cafe down the street had finally perfected their cappuccino, that I'd been craving one all week, but kept forgetting to stop before work. The next morning, Friday, there was a cappuccino waiting at the front desk with my name on it. Chiara claimed someone had dropped it off anonymously. 2 weeks later, I complained to Alessia about the broken cable machine in the corner of the studio, how management kept promising to fix it, but never followed through. The following Monday, a brand new cable machine stood in its place. When I asked Chiara what had happened, She just shrugged and said someone had made an anonymous donation to the gym's equipment fund. Small things kept appearing. A book I'd mentioned wanting to read left in my locker. My favorite protein bars mysteriously restocked in the trainer's pantry after I'd mentioned they were sold out everywhere. Nothing expensive enough to be alarming, nothing that crossed any obvious lines, but a pattern of attention that felt both flattering and unsettling. I couldn't prove it was Renato. He never mentioned any of it, never sought credit or acknowledgement. During our sessions, he remained perfectly professional, responding to my instructions with the same focused attention he'd shown from the beginning. But I noticed things too. The way he remembered details I'd mentioned in passing weeks earlier, how his schedule never conflicted with our sessions, even when I knew from Alessia that he ran multiple businesses and should have been drowning in obligations. The fact that he never canceled, never arrived late, never cut a session short. "He's into you," Alessia declared one afternoon as we cleaned the studios after the last clients had left. "Like, seriously into you." "He's a client," I replied automatically, wiping down a bench with more force than necessary. "That's all." "A client who's been training with you for 2 months and hasn't so much as looked at another trainer. A client who shows up for every single session like clockwork. A client who—" "Hasn't asked me out again," I interrupted. "He made one inappropriate comment on the first day, apologized, and has been completely professional ever since." Alessia gave me a look that suggested I was being deliberately obtuse. "Julia, the man is clearly waiting for you to give him a signal that you're interested. He's not going to push because you shut him down hard the first time." "Good, because I'm not interested." The lie tasted wrong in my mouth, but I couldn't quite bring myself to examine why. Everything changed on a Tuesday in October, 3 months to the day after Renato's first session. I arrived at 5:30 a.m. to find Chiara at the desk, with an expression I'd never seen on her usually cheerful face. "Fear, Julia. There were men here looking for one of your clients," she said quietly, glancing toward the main entrance as if expecting them to return. "They came right when I opened at 5. 3 of them. Asked about Renato Mancini." My stomach dropped. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing. I said we couldn't give out client information. But Julia..." She lowered her voice even further. "They didn't look like they were here to join a gym. They looked like the kind of men you see in movies. The scary kind." I thought about Renato's emergency contact form, still blank after 3 months. The expensive clothes that weren't flashy but screamed wealth. The way he moved, controlled and aware, like someone who'd been taught to assess threats automatically. "If they come back, call the police," I said, trying to sound calmer than I felt. "And don't give out any information about any client." The morning proceeded normally until 5:55 a.m., when Renato didn't appear. 6 o'clock came and went, then 6:05. At 6:10, I pulled out my phone and stared at his contact information, debating whether reaching out would be professional or crossing a line. At 6:15, Alessia appeared in the studio doorway. "Julia, those men are back. They're asking for you." The main gym floor felt too bright, too exposed as I walked out. 3 men stood near the entrance, exactly as Chiara had described. Expensive suits that didn't quite hide the shapes beneath, suggesting they were armed. The kind of men who made their living through intimidation. The tallest one, with silver-shot dark hair and eyes like chips of obsidian, smiled when he saw me. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "Julia Ferretti?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Who's asking?" "Friends of Renato Mancini." The smile widened fractionally. "We understand you've been spending a lot of time with him." Every self-defense instinct I'd learned over years of working early mornings in an urban gym screamed at me to run. But there were other people in the building, other trainers, early morning clients. Whatever this was, I couldn't let it escalate here. "I'm his personal trainer," I said, keeping my voice steady. "That's all. If you want to speak with him about his fitness routine, I'm happy to provide general information about..." We're not interested in his fitness routine. The man's smile disappeared entirely. We're interested in where he is. I don't know where he is. He's a client who comes 3 times a week for an hour. I don't have access to his personal schedule. The men exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them. The leader turned back to me, and this time there was something almost pitying in his expression. You really don't know, do you? Who he is, what he is. Before I could respond, the gym's front door opened with enough force to make everyone turn. Renato walked in, and I barely recognized him. Same expensive athletic wear, same controlled movements, but everything about his bearing had changed. The pleasant, polite client I'd been training for 3 months had been replaced by something harder, more dangerous. His eyes found mine first, a brief flash of what might have been concern, before settling on the 3 men with an expression that could have frozen steel. Saverio. His voice was colder than I'd ever heard it. You're making a scene. The leader, Saverio, spread his hands in a gesture that might have looked placating, if not for the threat still evident in his posture. Just having a conversation with your trainer. Didn't realize you kept such regular appointments. My schedule is none of your concern. Everything you do is our concern. You know that. Saverio's gaze flicked to me, then back to Renato. Especially when you're associating with civilians. Your father wants to see you. Tell my father I'll call him when I'm ready. He's not asking, Renato. The tension in the air was thick enough to taste, metallic and sharp. I watched Renato's hands, which had remained loose and relaxed throughout our sessions, curl slowly into fists. Tell him I said no. The 3 men left without another word, but the threat of their presence lingered long after the door closed behind them. The few other people in the gym pretended to focus on their workouts, but I could feel their awareness, their fear. Renato turned to me, and the dangerous stranger disappeared, replaced by something closer to the man I'd come to know. I'm sorry you were brought into this. Who are you? The question emerged smaller than I'd intended, shakier. Can we talk? Privately? He gestured toward the studio, and after a moment's hesitation, I nodded. Inside the mirrored room where we'd spent so many hours in simple, straightforward training, Renato stood near the window, his profile sharp against the early morning light creeping through the blinds. My father is Augusto Mancini, he said finally, and my family has been in organized crime for 3 generations. The words should have shocked me more than they did. Instead, they settled into place like pieces of a puzzle I hadn't realized I'd been solving. Is that why you came here? To hide? To try to build something different? He turned to face me, and there was an exhaustion in his expression that seemed bone deep. I've been trying to separate myself from the family business for 2 years. It's why I never asked you out again after that first day. Why I kept our interactions strictly professional. I didn't want to bring you into my world. Too late for that, apparently. I know, and I'm sorry. He moved closer, but stopped well before entering my personal space. Those men won't bother you again. I'll make sure of it, but I think it's best if I find another gym. Another trainer. For your safety. The thought of him leaving, of never seeing him again, created an unexpected hollow feeling in my chest. Is that what you want? No. The answer was immediate, honest. But what I want doesn't matter compared to keeping you safe. I thought about 3 months of perfectly professional sessions, of small kindnesses delivered anonymously, of a man who'd shown up consistently, who'd respected every boundary I'd set, who'd asked for nothing beyond an hour of my professional time 3 mornings a week. What if I don't want you to go? His expression shifted, surprise and something warmer breaking through the careful control. Julia, I'm not saying I want to date you. I'm not saying anything beyond this. You're my client, you've been respectful, and I don't make professional decisions based on threats from criminals. My hands were shaking, so I crossed my arms. If you want to leave for your own safety, or because you've decided you want a different trainer, that's your choice. But don't leave because of them. You don't understand what you're saying. What being associated with me could mean. Then explain it to me. He did. Over the next 30 minutes, as the gym slowly filled with early morning clients and trainers preparing for the day, Renato told me about growing up in a family where violence was currency and loyalty was everything. About his attempts to build legitimate businesses, to create distance from operations he wanted no part of. About the constant pressure to return, to accept his role as eventual heir to an empire he despised. I thought if I could just stay away long enough, keep my head down, they'd eventually accept that I'm out, he finished. But my father sees that as weakness. And now that Saverio knows about you, now what? Now they know where to apply pressure. His jaw tightened. I'm sorry, Julia. I never should have involved you in this, even indirectly. I should have been terrified. Maybe I was, underneath the strange calm that had settled over me. But I was also angry at men who thought they could intimidate me in my own workplace, at a system that gave Renato no choice but to hide who he was, at the unfairness of finding myself caring about a client I'd tried so hard to keep at professional distance. I need time to think about this, I said finally. About what it means, what I'm comfortable with. But Renato, I meant what I said. Don't let them make your decisions for you. He nodded slowly, something like hope flickering in his gray eyes. Friday? Same time? Friday, I confirmed. Same time. After he left, I stood in the studio for a long time, watching my reflection in the mirrors and wondering when exactly I'd started lying to myself about my feelings for Renato Mancini. Renato didn't show up Friday, or the following Monday, or Wednesday. By the time Friday rolled around again, a week since our conversation in the studio, I'd convinced myself he'd made the smart decision to disappear from my life. It was better this way, safer. Exactly what I'd claimed I wanted from the beginning. Professional distance, clear boundaries, no complications. The hollow feeling in my chest suggested my body disagreed with my mind's assessment of the situation. I was running through the checklist for my 6 a.m. client when Alessia appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Package for you at the desk," she said, "from your missing VIP." The envelope was cream-colored, expensive paper stock, my name written across it in precise handwriting. Inside was a single sheet, the same quality paper, and a key. "Julia, I owe you an explanation that requires more than the hour we'd normally have together. If you're willing, meet me at the address below tonight at 8. The key opens the private entrance. If you choose not to come, I'll understand, and I'll arrange for a different gym. The choice is entirely yours. Renato below." His name was an address in the waterfront district, the same neighborhood he'd listed on his intake form. I stared at the note for so long that Alessia finally cleared her throat. "So, what does it say?" "He wants to meet. Tonight." I turned the key over in my palm, heavy and cold. "To explain." "Are you going to go?" The smart answer was no. The safe answer was no. Every piece of professional training I'd ever received screamed no. "I don't know," I admitted. By the time 8 o'clock arrived, I'd changed my clothes 3 times, vacillating between something professional, because this wasn't a date, something casual, because I didn't want to seem like I was trying, and something in between, because I had no idea what I was doing. I settled on jeans and a simple sweater, pulled my hair into a ponytail, and drove to the waterfront district with my phone's GPS guiding me through streets that became progressively nicer the closer I got to the water. The building was a converted warehouse, all exposed brick and enormous windows. The kind of place featured in architecture magazines, where a single unit probably cost more than I'd make in 5 years. The private entrance Renato had mentioned was around the side, a discreet door that the key opened smoothly. The elevator inside was small, intimate, with only one button. It carried me up 3 floors and opened directly into a loft that took my breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the harbor, the city lights reflected in dark water. The space was open, minimalist, with furniture that looked both comfortable and expensive. But what caught my attention was the kitchen island, where Renato stood chopping vegetables with the same precise attention he brought to exercise form. He looked up when the elevator opened, and something in his expression softened when he saw me. "You came. You sent a key and a cryptic note." My curiosity outweighed my common sense. I stepped into the loft, hyper-aware of the click of the elevator closing behind me, of being alone with him in his private space for the first time. "I'm making dinner," he said, gesturing to the ingredients spread across the marble counter. "Nothing fancy. Pasta, vegetables, simple proteins." I thought neutral territory might be easier than a restaurant, but I didn't want you to feel obligated to anything. The food is optional. The thoughtfulness of the arrangement, the way he'd anticipated my concerns about meeting him alone, made something warm unfurl in my chest. "I could eat," I admitted. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his face from handsome to something approaching devastating. "Good, because I've been told I make decent carbonara." I perched on one of the stools across from him, watching as he moved through the cooking process with the same focus he brought to everything. The domesticity of it was jarring, this glimpse of a life he kept carefully separate from the criminal empire he was trying to escape. "Tell me about it," I said finally, "about growing up in that world." He was quiet for a long moment, adding pasta to boiling water, adjusting the heat beneath a pan of vegetables. When he spoke, his voice was measured, like he was choosing each word carefully. "My grandfather came to this country with nothing. He built a network through the Italian community, providing services banks wouldn't, protection police couldn't or wouldn't offer. By the time my father took over, it had evolved into something bigger, darker. Money laundering, protection rackets, strategic violence when necessary. And you? I was groomed for it from birth. Private schools during the day, lessons in the family business at night, how to read people, how to leverage weaknesses, how to inspire loyalty through a combination of generosity and fear." He strained the pasta, the steam rising around his face. I was good at it. That was the problem. I was very good at it. There was something almost like grief in his voice, for a version of himself he'd tried to leave behind. What changed? I was 28 when my father ordered me to handle a problem. A union leader who wouldn't play along with our interests. The plan was intimidation, nothing more. But it went wrong. He plated the pasta with steady hands. A man died, not by my hand, but under my watch. And I looked at my father, waiting for some sign that we'd crossed a line, that this was different. But it wasn't. It was just business. He set a plate in front of me, the food arranged with the same precision he brought to everything. The carbonara looked and smelled perfect, but I couldn't bring myself to eat yet. I started separating my money from the family's, building legitimate businesses, real estate mostly, investments in companies that weren't fronts for anything. It took me 2 years to get clean enough that I could even consider walking away. But you didn't walk away. I tried. 6 months ago, I told my father I was out, that I'd maintain family loyalty in the sense that I'd never testify, never cooperate with law enforcement, but I was done with the operations. He finally sat down across from me, his own plate untouched. He said I could have a year, to prove I could build something worthwhile on my own. If I failed, I'd come back to the fold. And if you succeeded, then he'd accept my decision, in theory. Renato's expression suggested he didn't quite believe it. But 6 months into that year, I walked into a gym at 5:30 in the morning because I couldn't sleep, and I saw you training an elderly woman with more patience and care than I'd seen anyone show anything in my entire life. The shift in topic caught me off guard. Mrs. Battaglia, I watched you correct her form 3 times, so gentle she smiled each time instead of being frustrated. And I thought, I want someone like that in my life, someone who approaches the world with that kind of careful attention. My face heated, that familiar burn of embarrassment mixing with something warmer. So you asked me out in the first 5 minutes of our first session. So I completely destroyed any chance of you taking me seriously. He smiled ruefully. I spent the next 3 months trying to prove I could respect your boundaries, that I could be worthy of your time, even just professionally. The cappuccinos, the equipment donations, the books. I wanted you to know you were noticed, but I didn't want to push. You'd made your position clear. He finally picked up his fork, twirling pasta absently. And then Saverio showed up at the gym, and I realized I'd failed at the one thing that mattered, keeping you separate from all of this. We ate in silence for a few minutes. The carbonara was, as promised, excellent. The view from the windows was spectacular, and the man sitting across from me was nothing like I'd expected when he first walked into my studio 3 months ago. Why me? I asked finally. You could have anyone. Someone from your world who understands it. Someone with connections, with wealth, with... Someone who wouldn't look at me the way you did that first day when I crossed a line. He interrupted. Someone who wouldn't demand better from me simply by existing with such clear principles. He stood, moving to the window, his silhouette dark against the city lights. I'm not a good man, Julia. I've done things I can't undo, made choices I'll carry for the rest of my life. But around you, I want to be better. You make me want to be the kind of person who deserves someone like you. I joined him at the window, maintaining careful distance but close enough to see his reflection in the glass. I'm not some perfect person, Renato. I'm just a trainer who tries to help people move better through their lives. That's it. That's everything, he said quietly. In a world built on violence and control, you spend your days teaching people to be stronger, healthier, more capable. You build instead of destroy. That's not just anything. The intensity in his voice made my breath catch. I'd spent 3 months trying to maintain professional distance, trying to convince myself he was just another client, trying to ignore the way my pulse quickened every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 5:55 a.m. I don't know how to do this, I admitted. I don't know how to be involved with someone who has your history, your complications. I don't know if I'm strong enough for whatever your world requires. Then don't be involved with my world. Just be involved with me. He turned to face me fully. I have 4 months left on the year my father gave me. 4 months to prove I can build something worthwhile on my own. Let me prove it. Not to him, to you. And if something happens, if those men come back, if your father decides a year isn't enough, then I'll protect you, whatever it costs me. The promise was absolute, unshakable. But I won't push you into anything you're not ready for. If you want to keep things professional, I'll respect that. If you want me to find another gym entirely, I'll do it. The choice is yours. I looked at his face, really looked at him for the first time without the filter of professional distance, saw the exhaustion around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the cost of trying to build something new while carrying the weight of everything he was trying to leave behind. Friday, I said finally. 6 a.m., same program, same studio. Hope flickered in his expression. Same trainer? Same trainer. I paused. But Renato? No more anonymous gifts. If you want to give me something, do it directly, and no more hiding. If I'm choosing to be part of your life, even just as your trainer, I need to know what that means. All of it. All of it, he agreed, starting with the fact that I'm still completely serious about wanting that date. When you're ready, if you're ever ready. I should have maintained the professional boundary. Should have kept things safe and simple. But standing in his loft, with the city spread out beneath us and honesty hanging in the air between us, I made a different choice. "Ask me again on Friday," I said. "After our session. When we're both just two people who showed up at an ungodly hour to work toward something better." His smile was slow, genuine, transforming his entire face. "I'll be there. 5:55. Same as always." 5:55, I confirmed. Same as always, except we both knew nothing would be the same as always. Not anymore. Friday morning arrived with rain, the kind of cold October downpour that made the pre-dawn darkness feel even heavier. I'd been awake since 4, alternating between wondering if I was making a massive mistake and trying to plan what I'd say if Renato actually followed through on asking me out again. At 5:45, I was already in the studio, ostensibly checking equipment, but really just burning off nervous energy. The gym was quieter than usual, and the rain keeping some of the early morning regulars at home. At precisely 5:55 a.m., the studio door opened. Renato stood in the doorway, his hair slightly damp from the rain, water beading on his jacket. He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw the same nervous energy I felt reflected in his expression. "Good morning," he said finally. "Good morning." I gestured to the warm-up area. "Let's start with mobility work. The weather's brutal, and I don't want you pulling something." We fell into the familiar rhythm of our sessions, but everything felt different now. When I adjusted his form during a kettlebell swing, I was acutely aware of the warmth of his shoulder beneath my hand. When he asked a question about programming, I noticed the way his eyes focused entirely on me, like I was the only thing in the room worth his attention. By the end of the hour, I was wound so tight I thought I might snap. "Excellent work," I said, checking off the last exercise on my clipboard. "Next week we'll increase the weight on your compound movements. Your strength progression has been solid." Renato accepted the towel I offered, wiping his face and neck with slow, deliberate movements. "Julia?" "Yes?" "Would you have dinner with me? Not as my trainer, not in my loft where I can control the environment. A real date, somewhere public, where you can leave at any moment if you want to." The question was so different from his opening line 3 months ago. No arrogance, no assumption. Just a genuine request from someone who'd proven he could respect a boundary. "Saturday night," I heard myself say. 7 o'clock. 7. Pick somewhere I can wear jeans because I'm not doing the fancy dress thing yet. His smile was brilliant. "There's a small Italian place in the North End. Family-owned, 40 years. Best osso buco in the city, and you can absolutely wear jeans." "Then it's a date." The words hung in the air between us, weighted with everything they meant. I was crossing a line I'd maintained with every client for 2 years, breaking my own rules, stepping into territory that terrified me. But I was also choosing something for myself, someone who'd shown me more respect and patience than anyone I'd dated before I'd established those rules in the first place. "I'll pick you up at 6:30, Renato said. "If that's all right?" I nodded, already mentally cataloging which jeans fit best, what sweater would be nice without looking like I was trying too hard. 6:30 works. After he left, Alessia materialized in the doorway with an expression that suggested she'd been hovering in the hallway. "So?" she demanded. "So we have a date Saturday night." She squealed, actually squealed before pulling me into a hug. "I knew it. I knew from the first day he was serious about you." He asked me out in the first 5 minutes. Of course he was serious. "No," Alessia pulled back, shaking her head. "He was serious enough to spend 3 months proving he could respect your boundaries. That's different. That's actually kind of perfect." Maybe it was. Or maybe I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life. But standing in the studio where Renato had shown up every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for 3 months, where he'd listened to every correction and followed every program without complaint, where he'd built something trustworthy from the wreckage of that disastrous first impression, I found I was willing to take the risk. Saturday evening found me standing in front of my closet for the third time, having rejected 2 previous outfit choices. Finally settling on dark jeans and a soft gray sweater, I was applying minimal makeup when my phone buzzed. "I'm here. No rush." I looked out my apartment window to see a car idling at the curb. Not the sleek, expensive sedan I'd expected, but a dark blue SUV that looked sturdy and safe rather than flashy. Renato was waiting beside it, dressed in dark jeans and a black sweater, looking somehow more attractive in casual clothes than he ever had in his expensive athletic wear. When he saw me approaching, he opened the passenger door with a slight smile. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "You clean up nice yourself." I slid into the seat, noting the interior was immaculate, but not ostentatious. "This isn't what I expected you to drive." "The Maserati's in the garage," he admitted, closing my door and rounding to the driver's side. "But I thought you might appreciate something less conspicuous for a first date." The consideration touched me more than I wanted to admit. The restaurant he'd chosen was exactly as described. Small, family-owned, with checked tablecloths and candles in wine bottles. The kind of place where the owner greeted Renato by name and kissed both his cheeks before showing us to a corner table. "You're a regular here," I observed after we were seated. "My grandmother used to bring me here when I was young. Before." He gestured vaguely. "Before everything got complicated. The owner's daughter married my cousin. They're good people." Good people in his world, I noted. People who knew what his family was, but saw something beyond it. We ordered wine, appetizers, and I let Renato recommend the osso buco he'd promised. As we waited for food, the conversation flowed more easily than I'd anticipated. He asked about my path to personal training, and I found myself telling him about my grandmother, who'd emphasized the importance of strength and health after watching her own mother deteriorate from preventable conditions. She used to say that taking care of your body was the first act of self-respect, I said, tracing the rim of my wine glass, that you couldn't take care of anyone else if you didn't take care of yourself first. Wise woman. Renato's expression was thoughtful. My grandmother said something similar. She believed that real strength was knowing when to fight and when to walk away. Did she know about the family business? She was the one who started it. His smile was sad. Back when it was just helping new immigrants, before it evolved into what it became. She died thinking she'd built something to protect our people. I'm glad she didn't live to see what it turned into. The food arrived, and it was as excellent as promised. We ate and talked, and I found myself relaxing in a way I hadn't expected. Renato was funny when he let himself be, with a dry sense of humor that emerged when he wasn't maintaining careful control. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers, remembered details from conversations we'd had during training sessions. By the time dessert arrived, I'd almost forgotten the circumstances that had brought us together. Almost. "Can I ask you something?" I said, setting down my fork. "Anything." "Why personal training? Of all the ways you could have spent your time during this year your father gave you, why choose to work with a trainer 3 mornings a week?" He considered the question seriously, swirling the wine in his glass. "Because it was the opposite of everything I'd known. In my father's world, strength means domination, control, making people fear you enough to do what you want." He looked up, meeting my eyes. "But watching you train people, I saw a different kind of strength. You push people to be better, but you do it by building them up, not breaking them down. That's what I wanted to learn. How to build something instead of just maintaining what already existed through force." The insight into his motivation made my chest tight. "And did you? Learn it?" "I'm still learning. But yes, I think so. My real estate company turned profitable last quarter. Legitimately profitable. And I have 5 employees who trust me because I treat them fairly, not because they're afraid of me." He reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of mine. "I'm not there yet. but I'm closer than I was 3 months ago. I close the distance, letting my fingers brush against his. For what it's worth, I think you're doing better than you give yourself credit for. His hand turned, palm up, an invitation rather than a demand. I placed my hand in his, feeling the calluses that had developed from months of training, the strength tempered by gentleness. "Come home with me," he said quietly. "Not for. I just don't want this evening to end yet. We can sit on the balcony, watch the city, talk more. I'll have you back whenever you say." I should have said no. First date, professional boundaries, all the rules I'd established for good reason, but I found myself nodding instead. "Okay, but Renato, I need to be home by 11. I have early clients tomorrow." 11. I promise. The drive back to his loft was quiet, comfortable. When we arrived, he led me out onto the balcony I'd glimpsed during my first visit. The rain had stopped, leaving the city washed clean and glittering beneath a clearing sky. He brought out wine and a blanket, settling us into comfortable chairs positioned to overlook the harbor. We talked about everything and nothing, favorite books and terrible movies, and the places we'd each want to travel if time and money weren't considerations. At 10:45, Renato checked his watch and stood. "I promised 11. I should get you home." I stood as well, reluctant to end the evening despite my early morning. "Thank you. For tonight. For all of it. Thank you for giving me a chance." He stepped closer, and I could smell his cologne. That same subtle scent I'd noticed during our very first session. "Can I see you again? Outside of the gym?" "Yes." The answer came without hesitation. "Yes, I'd like that." "And at the gym? Monday morning?" "Monday morning, 5:55, same as always." He smiled, and then his hand came up to cup my face, giving me plenty of time to pull away if I wanted to. I didn't want to. Our first kiss was soft, tentative, a question more than a demand. When we pulled apart, I was breathless and smiling. "I'll see you Monday," I whispered. "I'm counting the hours already," he replied. He kept his promise, having me home with 5 minutes to spare. As I climbed the stairs to my apartment, I knew I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. But watching Renato drive away, already anticipating Monday morning, I found I didn't want to. Whatever came next, whatever complications his world brought into mine, at least I was choosing it with open eyes and full knowledge. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like the strongest position I could be in. The next 2 months fell into a pattern that felt almost normal. Renato showed up for training Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 5:55 a.m., with the same reliability he'd always shown. But now, after our sessions ended, he'd wait while I showered and changed, then walk me to the cafe down the street where we'd have breakfast together before our respective workdays began. Saturdays became our date night, rotating between the quiet Italian restaurant, where we'd had our first date, and other small, intimate places where we could talk without performance. Renato was careful about public displays, and I appreciated it, even as I began to understand it was less about hiding me and more about protecting me from the attention his world brought. He never hid our relationship from anyone who asked, but he also didn't advertise it beyond our immediate circles. I met some of his employees from his real estate company, people who clearly respected him and seemed genuinely happy to see him building something legitimate. But I didn't meet his family. That was the line we didn't discuss crossing. It was late December, 4 months since our first date, when everything shifted. I was locking up the studio after a late evening session when my phone rang from an unfamiliar number. Something made me answer instead of letting it go to voicemail. "Julia Ferretti?" The voice was older, male, with an accent that reminded me of Renato's, but thicker, more pronounced. "Who's asking?" "My name is Augusto Mancini. I believe you know my son." My hand tightened around the phone. I'd been expecting this call since that first date, but that didn't make it less terrifying now that it was happening. What do you want? To meet you. You've become important to Renato, which makes you important to me. His tone was pleasant, almost grandfatherly. Tomorrow, 2 o'clock. I'll send a car. I'll drive myself. Tell me where. A pause, then a low chuckle. You have spine. Good. Renato needs that. He rattled off an address in a neighborhood I didn't recognize. Come alone, Ms. Ferretti. And don't tell my son. What we discuss will be between us. The line went dead before I could respond. I should have told Renato immediately. Should have called him, told him his father had reached out, asked him what to do. Instead, I found myself driving to the address Augusto had given me the next afternoon, telling myself I was being smart, getting information, understanding what I was truly dealing with. The building was an old social club in the Italian North End, the kind of place with a discreet entrance and no windows facing the street. Inside, it was dimly lit, smelling of cigar smoke and expensive leather. An older man in a suit that probably cost more than my car gestured me toward a private room in the back. Augusto Mancini sat behind a large wooden desk, and the family resemblance was unmistakable. The same sharp features, the same gray eyes, but with an edge of hardness that Renato had learned to soften. Ms. Ferretti, thank you for coming. He gestured to a chair across from him. Please, sit. I sat, keeping my spine straight and my expression neutral. What do you want to discuss? My son, his experiment with legitimate business, and you. He steepled his fingers, studying me with the same intensity I'd seen in Renato. Tell me, do you love him? The directness of the question caught me off guard. I care about him. That's not what I asked. I met his gaze steadily. With respect, Mr. Mancini, my feelings for your son are between him and me. His expression shifted, something like approval flickering across his features. You're stronger than I expected. Good. He'll need that in the months ahead. What do you mean? Renato's year is almost up. In 3 weeks, he'll have to make a choice. Come back to the family business, or walk away permanently. Augusto leaned forward. I'm a man of my word, Ms. Ferretti. If he's built something worthwhile, I'll honor his decision. But I need to know he's thought it through, that he understands what he's giving up. He understands perfectly. He's made his choice. Has he? Has he told you what working for me really means? The protection, the network, the resources? Augusto's voice was almost gentle. Or has he only told you about the violence, the danger, the moral compromises? I said nothing, and he continued. My son is talented, Ms. Ferretti. More talented than he wants to admit. The businesses he's built in a year, the employees he's retained, the profits he's generated. He did all that while carrying the weight of knowing he could fail, knowing I was watching, waiting for him to stumble. Augusto's expression was almost proud. Imagine what he could do with the full resources of the family behind him, what we could build together. He doesn't want that. He thinks he doesn't want it. Hey everyone, sorry to interrupt, but as most of you probably know by now, YouTube isn't paying me for these videos anymore. So this complete video is my gift to the supporters who are keeping this channel alive. You'll find the full story over on Buy Me a Coffee. For those who can't support financially right now, I totally understand. I'll still be posting some videos here, but less frequently, because I need to focus my time on the community that's helping me keep this dream going. The link is in the description. Thank you so much for everything. I love you all.